Please pray with me. God, your mission and your Holy Spirit go before us always. When we fall behind, catch us up. When we drift off course, correct us. And when we catch the wind just right, give us joy and boldness in your presence. We ask you to speak to us today, to speak to your church, that we might be renewed and strengthened through your service in the world. We ask this in the name of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. I was going to say maybe I'll sneak out now and grab a cup of coffee. That's pretty good. And you know it must be a special occasion for those of you who are here regularly for me to be up in the pulpit. I'm usually down there, so it's a special day. Dear friends, whether you're a long-time member or if you're a first-time visitor or if you're walked down the street to be here, if you flew from California to be here, whatever brings you here today, may grace and peace be with you from God our Father and from our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. If there's one thing that I've learned this weekend in the preparations for today, it's that every place and every person has a story. And sometimes there's more story there than you realize. And those stories layer over each other, generation to generation. It's like a rich layered cake. You know, cake, frosting, more cake, more frosting. I'm a big fan of chocolate, so I'm imagining a chocolate cake. This weekend has been a rich dessert of stories. Layers and layers to enjoy, to savor. I'm so grateful for the many people who have worked to bring this together, the people who have shared their stories with us, the people who have gathered those stories. I'm especially grateful to Lyle Amundsen for gathering our collective stories together in that history book and for organizing those tours. And I'd like to recognize Lyle one more time for that work. And there are so many stories here. We've heard stories from former pastors and their descendants. And then each one of you in the pews has their own stories. The stories that have brought you here, the stories that will break your heart, the stories that will give you hope for the future. A few weeks ago, Lyle, Ingolf Haugen, and Steve Haugen and I went for a drive to kind of plot out those stops on our driving tour from yesterday. And between Lyle, Ingolf, and Steve, every farm we would go by, they would have, a name for who used to live there, who lives there now, the story there. I've driven that part of the countryside before, but it's just been scenery to me. It looks nice, but I haven't really stopped to think. But with the help of a few storytellers, you realize that the countryside is more than just scenery. It is a place rich with meaning and significance. Layers and layers of meaning. Just like chocolate cake. I kind of want to try The same thing happened as we explored our cemetery. You can walk through our cemetery, if you don't know the names, they don't mean much to you. But if you go there with a few storytellers, those names start to pop out. Each one has a story behind it. And those names become richer and richer until it's like looking through a family photo album. We sometimes hear that the universe is meaningless, that this is just a big event, a bunch of space, ages and ages. What could it possibly matter if we're alive on the earth right now? But I actually think the opposite is true. That there's an overabundance of meaning if you just take the time to learn the story. There are more stories than we can hold in our memory. And there's more significance than we can even take into our hearts. I think the only one who can hold all those stories and all of its meaning in their heart is God. The everlasting God, as Pastor Nowlin reminded us of last night. I'm a fan of Broadway musicals, and there's a Broadway musical called Dear Evan Hansen. You don't need to know a lot of background for the song, but it's a song called Disappear. And in the song, they're singing about a classmate who has died, and the chorus says, no one deserves to be forgotten. No one deserves to fade away. And then again, no one deserves to disappear. It reminds me that remembering one another's stories is holy work, because no one deserves to be forgotten. There's a deep anxiety in us if we pause for a moment. I think especially when you think of the vast size of the universe and the ages and ages of time, that some lives, some memories, some stories will be forgotten, that we may disappear given enough time. It reminds me of a story of a pastor visiting a family in a memory care unit. A middle-aged daughter sitting with her elderly mother in advanced stages of dementia, and saying to her pastor, "I'm not even sure my mom remembers who she is anymore." And the pastor, not knowing exactly what to say, but after a pause, saying, "I think God remembers for her." We may forget the names and places, although it's nice to have it written down in a book. We may get distracted and miss the significance of the people and places around us. But nothing disappears for God. No person is insignificant. Our God remembers the name of each precious child. And that means you, too. That means us. Our God is the one who holds all of our stories together. And so we participate in that, in the holy work of telling one another's stories. In 2010, there was a group of psychologists at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, and they did a study about the impact of knowing your ancestors' stories on teenage development. And they put together a questionnaire to kind of gauge how much each teenager knew of their family's history. And they compared that to well-being and sense of identity. And what they found, and I'm going to quote what they found here: family stories provide a sense of identity through time and help children understand who they are in the world. In other words, knowing our stories helps us know who we are, identity, and who we are called to be, who we are to be in the world. If that's true for teenagers figuring out who they are, how much more so for the people of God, as they remember who they are when God claims them as God's own, as they remember who they're called to be as the church. So as we celebrate 150 years, and we ask, what's the story of Orfeville Lutheran? What's the story of us? It helps us remember who we are and whose we are, and it reminds us of who we are called to be in the world. God's church in mission for the sake of a world that needs the good news. We heard that story yesterday driving around, and we'll continue to tell it. I hope you'll continue to tell it. The story of in 1839, the first Norwegian settlers coming here and building homes. A group getting together in what's now a farm field and writing a letter to Norway and saying, "Please send us a pastor so we can have a church." And Pastor Clausen coming here and naming this whole area of Luther Valley in 1844. And we know that story is not always easy. We heard the story about the 1853 cholera epidemic, where they couldn't even bury people fast enough. We heard the story of the split between what's now Luther Valley and Orfeville Lutheran in 1868. How the third of that church that formed our church didn't have a building for a while and worshipped in schoolhouses for about 4 years. So all of those saints who have gone before us, who have left the legacy of this place, of this building, of the missions that have developed and grown over the years. So as you sit there and as you go out today, how will you take that story with you? What will it teach you about your identity? And what will it teach you about who you are called to be? Part of what that story teaches me is that we are part of a bigger story. That, we kind of get stuck, like with a horse with blinders on, thinking that it's just me, and sometimes we might think we're the center of the universe. Well, when we put ourselves in perspective of 150 years, we realize that we are caught up in something so much bigger than ourselves. And that, I think, is what happened to Abram, too, in that first reading from Genesis 12. Here, Abram is living with his family, and when you're talking about Klaus Friedman leaving his family behind. Abram knew something of that. God comes to him at age 75 and says, leave your family, leave the place where you've lived your whole life, and go someplace else. Choose to be a sojourner. Choose to be a stranger. Choose to be a refugee in the world. You know, we have refugees in our world who are economic and forced out by war and violence. But have you ever heard of a faith-based refugee? The one who just said, God told me to go and be a refugee, so here I am. Knowing that he was leaving behind his whole family, just like Klaus Friedman was. And not only that, but God says you're part of something so much bigger. And I think at this point I would have fallen over maybe with the size of what God says to Abram. He says, you're going to bless all the nations in the world. I'm going to bless you to be a blessing to everyone. What would going to sleep that night be like? I think I'd be tossing and turning a little bit. You know? We too are part of a much bigger story. That mission of God to bless the nations of the world. That mission of God to bring blessing and wholeness and life, abundant life, to all creation is not over. And God calls us into it too. It actually brings us a little bit of bad news, which turned out to be good news. The bad news is that we are not the heroes of our own story. I think when we think we're the center of the universe, you know, we're the main character in the plot of the universe, it's kind of bad news to hear, wait, something so much bigger is going on here. You're not the hero of this story, because God is. God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, Jesus Christ, is the hero of your story, is the hero of the church's story. So the bad news is we're not the hero of the story, but the good news is we don't have to be, because we have a Savior, because we have a God who is here bringing blessing and life and blessing on our behalf. So I want to close my sermon with a song, which I've been kind of thinking, I sang it last night as well, but I've been kind of thinking of it as a sung sermon. And one of the things I wanted to point out about it is you'll notice in all the verses, the subject of all the verbs is God. That this church does not exist apart from the power of the Spirit. That this church does not exist apart from the true vine, which is Jesus Christ. So it is God who we praise and celebrate today. It is God who gives us hope for the future. This song is called A Ship Called Hope, and for me it's based on that ship that hangs our sanctuary, reminding us that we give thanks for God's faithfulness in the past, but that ship called hope is the one that gives us hope for the future too. God sends us from Easter. God sends us from the cross. God sends us through holy water. God sends you to me. God sends us over oceans. God sends us to the holy wheel. God sends us to this village. God sends us to set free. We are sailing on a ship called hope, sailing on the Holy Spirit's wing. Guided by your love and held in your arms, you're coming for to carry us home. God gave us one another. God gave us history. God gave us words of wisdom. God gave us signs of peace. God gave us food and family. God gave us more to share. God gives us to this village. God gives us all we are sailing on the ship on float, sailing on the Holy Spirit's wheel. Guided by your love and held in your arms, you're coming for to carry us home. God called us over oceans, God called us to places, God calls us to new journeys, God calls us to hope paths. God calls us to each other, God calls us to serve with love. God calls us to this village, God calls us each by name. We are sailing wherever the wind may blow. 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 We are sailing on a ship called hope, sailing on the Holy Spirit's guided by your love and held in your arms. You're coming for to carry us home. We are sailing on a ship called hope, sailing on the Holy Spirit's wheel. Guided by your love and held in your arms, you're coming for to carry us home. Coming for to carry us home. Coming for to carry